Rain hammered the stained glass, while Carmela Costanzo sat drowning beneath judgmental stares inside Manhattan's most exclusive dining room. She was the soft, curved daughter of a dock king who'd married a monster disguised as a prince. 3 years of frozen beds and hollow smiles shattered the night she overheard her husband laughing with his mistress. He said, "She's not my wife. She's camouflage." He said, "As long as I'm married to Lorenzo's fat daughter, the ports belong to me." But the shy woman begging for love died in that hallway, and Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter finally woke up. The rain started 3 hours before Carmela's marriage officially died. She stood outside this private lounge at Le Nocturne. She was wearing a black velvet gown that cost $8,000. But it made her feel like she was drowning in fabric. The dress was supposed to hide her. Everything she wore was supposed to hide her. Oversized sleeves and high necklines. Anything that kept Manhattan's Mafia elite from noticing that Lorenzo Costanzo's only daughter didn't fit their idea of what power was supposed to look like. Inside the lounge, someone laughed. Carmela recognized that laugh immediately. It belonged to Damian Valenti. He was her husband of 3 years and the devastatingly handsome underboss. He looked like old Hollywood money and moved through rooms like he owned the oxygen. Women stared at him everywhere they went. Men either feared him or wanted to be him. And Carmela. She'd spent 1,000 nights wondering why he'd chosen her at all. She pressed closer to the doorframe. Her pulse was hammering beneath expensive perfume and shame. A woman's voice purred through cigar smoke, asking if he was really going to keep playing house with her. That was Serafina Vale, blonde, sculptured. The kind of beautiful that made Carmela feel invisible even when she was standing right there. Damian's voice came next, smooth and cold. He said, "It's not playing house, baby. It's strategy." Carmela's breath caught. "Strategy," Serafina laughed. "You married her." "I married her father's empire," Damian corrected. "Lorenzo controls every major shipping lane on the East Coast. The docks, the unions, the cargo routes, all of it flows through him. And the old bastard doesn't trust anyone except blood." Silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then Serafina spoke again, softer this time. "So what's she to you?" Damian didn't hesitate. "Camouflage. As long as I'm married to Lorenzo's fat daughter, the ports belong to me. Once the old man dies and I've consolidated control, I'll make the divorce quiet. Give her some money, ship her off to Europe. She'll cry for a month, then fade away like she was never here." Carmela's knees buckled. She caught herself against the marble wall. Her fingernails scraped gold-flecked stone while her entire world collapsed into a single burning point of humiliation. 3 years. 3 years of sleeping alone in a king-sized bed while Damian disappeared for nights at a time. 3 years of smiling through charity galas and pretending not to notice the way other wives looked at her with pity. 3 years of believing that maybe someday he'd see past her body and love the woman underneath. He never did. He never would. Because to Damian Valenti, she wasn't a woman at all. She was a business transaction. Carmela pushed herself upright. She smoothed her dress with trembling hands and walked straight toward the exit before anyone inside could see her falling apart. The rain outside hit her face like a baptism. Cold, clarifying, unforgiving. She stood there on the flooded sidewalk for 10 full minutes. Her mascara was running and her chest was heaving while Manhattan's traffic roared past, like it didn't care that her life had just imploded. Then something inside her went completely silent. The woman who spent 3 years begging for love didn't walk back into Le Nocturne that night. Someone else did. The funeral happened 6 weeks later. Lorenzo Costanzo died from a heart attack during a poker game in a Brooklyn social club. He collapsed face first into a pile of chips while his associates scrambled for phones and excuses. By the time the paramedics arrived, the dock king was already gone. And by the time the news hit the streets, every crime family on the eastern seaboard was already circling the empire like sharks smelling blood. Carmela stood at the graveside wearing black Armani and oversized sunglasses that hid everything. Damian stood beside her. He had one hand resting possessively on her lower back, while photographers captured the grief-stricken couple from behind police barricades. He looked perfect in a tailored wool suit with a clean-shaven jaw. His eyes were appropriately red-rimmed for a man mourning his father-in-law. He was performing. They both were. "You okay?" Damian whispered as the priest finished his final blessing. Carmela nodded without looking at him and said she was fine. Your father was a great man, Damian continued. His voice was low and sincere for anyone listening nearby. He said Lorenzo built something that'll last forever. He promised Carmela he would protect his legacy, everything he worked for, and everything he gave them. He said he'd keep it safe. She wanted to laugh. Instead, she just squeezed his hand and said exactly what a grieving daughter was supposed to say. Thank you, Damian. I know you'll. The cemetery emptied slowly. Black sedans peeled away one by one, carrying wise guys, politicians, and union bosses back toward the city. Damian stayed close to Carmela's side. He nodded at the right people and shook hands with his father-in-law's oldest allies. He was positioning himself as the natural successor to Lorenzo's throne. What he didn't know was that Lorenzo Costanzo never trusted him. Not once. Not ever. 3 months before his death, the old Don had called Carmela into his study overlooking the Tribeca waterfront. She remembered the way he looked that night. Gray-haired, barrel-chested, holding a tumbler of whiskey like it weighed nothing. Sit down, baby girl, he'd said. Carmela sat. Lorenzo studied her for a long time. It was the way fathers do when they're trying to decide how much truth their daughters can handle. He said, You know Damian doesn't love you. It wasn't a question. Carmela swallowed hard with her cheeks burning. Papa, stop, she said. Lorenzo interrupted. Don't defend him. Don't make excuses. I've been watching that boy for 3 years and I know exactly what he is. A climber. A parasite. He married you to get close to me, and the second I'm gone, he'll bleed this family dry. Carmela's voice came out small and broken. Then why did you let me marry him? Lorenzo's expression softened. Because you loved him, and I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe he'd surprise me. He paused. But I wasn't wrong. So now I'm going to give you something he can never take. He slid a black leather folio across the desk. Inside were account numbers, access codes, offshore banking coordinates, and a single biometric keycard tied to a vault in Zurich. Carmela stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. What's this? She asked. Everything, Lorenzo said simply. The real empire, not the docks or the union contracts or the shipping lanes. Damian can have all that. This is the money, Carmela. The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, the blackmail archives, the political leverage, everything that actually matters. And it's yours. Only yours. He'll never be able to touch it without your authorization. Carmela looked up at her father with tears blurring her vision. Why are you telling me this now? Lorenzo reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. He said because someday soon you're going to wake up and realize you deserve better than a man who treats you like a stepping stone. And when that day comes, I want you to have the power to walk away, not as a victim, but as a queen. Carmela had cried for an hour after that conversation. Now, standing at her father's grave while Damian schmoozed with captains and consigliers, she didn't cry at all. She just smiled. Damian left for the Hamptons the following weekend. He told Carmela it was business. Some meeting with distributors who needed reassurance about the transition of power. She nodded, kissed his cheek, and told him to drive safely. Then she stood at their penthouse window and watched his black Mercedes disappear into Friday afternoon traffic. She waited 20 minutes, then she moved. The safe in Damian's office opened with a code he thought she didn't know. Inside were deeds, contracts, and a Glock 19 he probably forgot was there. Carmela ignored all of it. She only wanted one thing, the external hard drive labeled insurance in Damian's handwriting. She slipped it into her purse. Next came her father's study. The one Damian had already started redecorating with modern furniture and abstract art that screamed new money. Carmela opened the false panel behind Lorenzo's old bookshelf. She removed the black ledger her father kept for 40 years. Every bribe, every favor, every secret deal that built the Costanzo empire. It weighed 5 pounds and contained enough evidence to destroy half of New York's political establishment. She added it to her purse. By sunset, Carmela Costanzo had packed 2 suitcases, transferred 3 encrypted files to a secure server, and booked a red-eye flight to Zurich under a passport Damian didn't know existed. She left her wedding ring on his desk. No letter, no explanation, just the ring sitting in a pool of lamplight like a discarded shell. And by the time Damian returned from the Hamptons on Sunday night, smelling like expensive cologne and Serafina's perfume, Carmela was already gone. Damian didn't panic immediately. He stood in the empty penthouse, staring at the wedding ring, and assumed she'd finally snapped. Maybe she found out about Serafina. Maybe she needed space. Either way, it didn't matter. Women like Carmela didn't just disappear. They cried, they yelled, they made scenes. Then they came crawling back because they had nowhere else to go. He tried calling her. Voicemail. He tried her friends. No one had seen her. He tried her credit cards. All inactive. By Monday morning, Damian was irritated. By Monday afternoon, he was concerned. By Tuesday, he was terrified. Because that's when the accounts started freezing. It began with the offshore holdings in the Caymans. Access denied. Then the Swiss accounts. Authorization required. Then the shell corporations in Luxembourg, Panama, and Singapore. One by one, every major financial artery connected to the Costanzo empire locked down completely. Damian's lawyer made frantic calls to bankers in 6 different countries. The answer was always the same. Access required primary account holder authorization, and the primary account holder was Carmela Costanzo. That's impossible, Damian snarled, during an emergency meeting with his consigliere, a gray-haired operator named Paulie Rizzo. Lorenzo left everything to me. I'm his son-in-law. I run the docks. I control the unions. Paulie looked uncomfortable. You control the infrastructure, boss. But the money was never technically yours. Damian's face went white. What? Lorenzo set it up that way on purpose. Paulie explained carefully. The shipping lanes, the contracts, the real estate, that's all in your name. But the cash, the offshore accounts, the leverage, he transferred all of it into biometric, secured trusts accessible only through Carmela. Damian stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. Why the hell would he do that? Paulie hesitated. Maybe he didn't trust you. The silence in the room turned sharp and dangerous. Damian's hands curled into fists. Find her, he said quietly. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who you have to pay. Find my wife and bring her home. But Carmela Costanzo wasn't coming home. She was sitting in a fortified estate overlooking Lake Zurich, drinking coffee, and watching the sun rise over the Alps like a woman reborn. But the transformation didn't happen overnight. Carmela spent the first 2 weeks in Switzerland doing nothing but sleeping, crying, and staring at mountains. She'd spent so many years trying to shrink herself into something acceptable that she'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without shame. The shame was still there, carved into her bones, woven into her DNA. But for the first time in her life, she had space to breathe around it. She hired security first. Not the kind of muscle Damian used. Loud, flashy men who wore their violence like jewelry. Carmela wanted ghosts, professionals. The kind of people who disappeared into shadows and reappeared only when blood needed spilling. That's how she met Elias Kane. He was former military, former intelligence, former everything that mattered in the world of people who solved problems quietly. He showed up at her estate wearing a gray suit and no expression. He laid a dossier on her kitchen table and said exactly 4 words. You need me. Carmela looked at the dossier. Inside were surveillance photos of Damian meeting with Russian syndicate bosses, leaked emails proving he'd been skimming from union pension funds, and recorded phone calls where he discussed selling Lorenzo's blackmail archives to federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. She looked up at Elias and asked where he got this. Your father hired me 6 months before he died, Elias said. He knew Damian would move against you the second he was gone. He wanted insurance. Carmela's throat tightened as she asked why he didn't tell her. Because he wanted you to choose this, Elias replied. Not because he forced you. Because you decided you were done being a victim. Carmela stared at the man across from her. This stranger who somehow understood her better than her own husband ever did. What do you want? She asked quietly. Elias smiled for the first time. To watch you burn his world down. The dock workers' strike started in March. It began small. A few union representatives demanding better wages, safer conditions, healthcare coverage, normal labor negotiations. But when the shipping companies refused to budge, the strike exploded overnight into a full-scale shutdown that paralyzed the entire eastern seaboard. Cargo ships sat frozen in the harbor, containers stacked up like dominoes. Narcotics shipments rotted in customs lockdowns. Weapons deliveries vanished into bureaucratic black holes. And every day the strike continued, Damian Valenti lost millions. He stormed into union headquarters, screaming threats, throwing furniture, and demanding explanations. But the union reps just stared at him with blank expressions and said the same thing over and over. The workers want what they're owed. What Damian didn't know was that every single union representative had received anonymous offshore payments doubling their strike fund. Payments that came from accounts Damian couldn't trace. Payments that kept the workers fed, housed, and motivated to hold their ground for as long as necessary. Carmela watched the chaos unfold from her estate in Switzerland. She tracked every news report, every financial loss, and every desperate move Damian made to stop the bleeding. It wasn't enough to destroy him. She wanted him to destroy himself. By April, Damian was hemorrhaging cash so fast he couldn't keep up. The other crime families started circling, smelling weakness. The commission called emergency meetings. Rival bosses made quiet offers to help. Offers that came with interest rates designed to swallow him whole. Damian turned them all down. Instead, he went to the Russians. Viktor Sokolov ran the Bratva's New York operations out of a Brighton Beach nightclub that looked like a tomb decorated by someone who'd only seen wealth in photographs. He was a big man, 6'4", 260 pounds of scar tissue and prison tattoos, and he smiled at Damian like a shark smiles at a drowning swimmer. "You need money," Victor said. It wasn't a question. Damian nodded, hating every second of this. Temporary liquidity issue. The strike won't last forever. Victor laughed. "You know what I love about Americans? You think words make things sound better. Liquidity issue. You're broke, Damian. Just say it." Damian's jaw clenched. "I need a loan. How much?" $50 million. Victor whistled low. "That's a lot of liquidity." He leaned back in his chair, studying Damian like a specimen under glass. "What's the collateral?" Damian hesitated. Then he said the words that sealed his fate. Everything. The Tribeca properties, the Brooklyn warehouses, the Atlantic City casino holdings, all of it. Victor's smile widened and he said, "Deal." They shook hands. Contracts were drawn up. Signatures were exchanged. And Damian Valenti walked out of that nightclub, believing he'd just saved his empire. What he didn't know was that Viktor Sokolov didn't own the debt. Carmela did. She'd purchased Victor's entire loan portfolio 3 weeks earlier through a shell corporation buried so deep in offshore banking structures that even the Russians couldn't trace it. Every dollar Damian borrowed, every property he signed over as collateral, all of it flowed directly into accounts controlled by the woman he'd called Camouflage. Elias handed her the contracts in her study overlooking the lake. "He just gave you everything," Elias said quietly. Carmela stared at Damian's signature on the loan documents. "Not yet," she replied, "but he will." Summer turned Damian Valenti into something unrecognizable. The strike finally ended in June, but by then the damage was irreversible. Half his cargo clients had switched to competitors. The unions didn't trust him. The commission was watching his every move, waiting for him to slip so they could devour what remained. He started drinking. Not socially, not casually. The kind of drinking that turned mornings into blurry nightmares and afternoons into desperate attempts to stop shaking. His custom suits hung loose on his shrinking frame. His perfect jawline disappeared beneath stubble he forgot to shave. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, became hollow and paranoid. Serafina left him in July. She didn't even bother with a dramatic exit. Just packed her luxury luggage one afternoon, while Damian was passed out on the couch, and flew to Dubai to move in with some billionaire who still had money. Damian woke up alone and didn't even have the energy to care. Everything was falling apart and he still couldn't find Carmela. His investigators had searched 6 countries. His hackers had tried breaking into every secure server on 3 continents. His underworld contacts had asked questions in places where questions usually got people killed. Nothing. It was like she'd evaporated. Late one night in August, Damian stood on the balcony of his Tribeca penthouse, the one he'd bought with Lorenzo's money, decorated with Lorenzo's taste, and filled with furniture that reminded him every single day that none of this was ever really his. He stared down at the street 30 floors below and wondered, just for a second, how long the fall would take. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe the screen. Hello. Silence. Then a woman's voice, calm, cold, familiar. Hello, Damian. His entire body went rigid. Carmela. I thought you'd want to know, she continued, ignoring his shock. The strike is over. The docks are operational again. Your empire survived. She paused. For now. Damian's hands started shaking. Where are you? What the hell are you doing? Collecting, Carmela said simply. You spent 3 years taking everything from me. My dignity, my self-worth, my belief that I deserve to be loved. So now I'm taking everything from you. And unlike you, Damian, I won't stop until there's nothing left. You're insane. No, she interrupted. I'm awake. There's a difference. The line went dead. Damian stood there on the balcony, phone pressed against his ear, listening to empty static while his entire world collapsed into a single horrifying realization. His wife wasn't running. She was hunting, and he was the prey. Damian didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark penthouse with a half-empty bottle of scotch and Carmela's voice echoing through his skull like a curse he couldn't shake. I'm taking everything from you. The words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a promise, like something that had already happened and he just hadn't realized it yet. By 3 a.m, he was on the phone with Paulie Rizzo, telling him he needed him there immediately. Paulie arrived 20 minutes later, wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt, looking like a man dragged out of bed by someone who'd forgotten how to ask nicely. He found Damian standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at Tribeca like he was searching for answers in the streetlights. Boss, it's 3 a.m. She called me, Damian said without turning around. Paulie went very still. Carmela, who the hell else? Damian's voice came out raw and jagged. She said she's collecting, said she won't stop until there's nothing left. Paulie rubbed his face with both hands. Did she say where she is? No. Did you trace the call? Burner phone. Bounced through 6 countries. Damian finally turned to look at his consigliere, and Paulie had to fight not to flinch at what he saw. The man standing in front of him didn't look like an underboss anymore. He looked like someone who'd been awake for 72 hours straight and forgotten how to blink. She's playing me, Paulie. She's been playing me this whole time. The strike, Damian interrupted. The union payments, the offshore accounts freezing, the Russians. He laughed, and it sounded like broken glass. It's all her, every single piece. She's dismantling me one move at a time, and I didn't even see it coming. Paulie crossed to the bar and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey because this conversation required alcohol. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say Carmela's behind everything. What's her endgame? Damian stared at him. Revenge. For what? The question hung in the air for 5 full seconds. Then Damian said very quietly, for being me. Paulie drank his whiskey in one swallow and immediately regretted it. Listen, boss. I've known Carmela since she was 16 years old. Sweet kid, shy, wouldn't hurt a fly. You really think she's capable of orchestrating all this? Damian moved closer, and his voice dropped into something cold and precise. I think I spent 3 years underestimating her because I thought kindness meant weakness. And now she's going to teach me exactly how wrong I was. Across the Atlantic, Carmela sat in her study watching dawn break over Lake Zurich while Elias Kane briefed her on the overnight intelligence reports. Damian made 14 phone calls between midnight and 4 a.m, Elias said, scrolling through intercepts on his tablet. Mostly to Paulie Rizzo, his lawyer, and a private investigator in Berlin who specializes in finding people who don't want to be found. Carmela sipped her coffee. Will the investigator find me? Not a chance. We've got digital ghosts layered 6 deep. Every trail leads to a dead end. Elias glanced up, but he's getting desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Good, Carmela said. I want him making mistakes. Elias studied her for a moment. This woman who'd transformed from a frightened housewife into something sharp and dangerous in the space of 4 months. She wore tailored silk now instead of shapeless velvet. Her hair was shorter, sharper. Her posture had changed. Everything about her radiated a quiet confidence that hadn't existed when she first arrived in Switzerland. Can I ask you something? Elias said. Carmela nodded. How far are you planning to take this? She looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. What do you mean? I mean, Damian's already bleeding. His empire's collapsing. His reputation's destroyed. You've won. Elias leaned forward. So where does this end? Carmela set her cup down very carefully. It ends when he understands what it feels like to be erased, to be invisible, to be nothing. Her voice stayed perfectly calm. It ends when he's sitting in a room full of people who used to fear him and realizes that none of them even remember his name. Elias nodded slowly. Okay then. Does that bother you? Carmela asked. No. Elias said honestly. I just wanted to make sure you knew what you were building. What am I building? Elias smiled. His funeral. The next move came 3 days later. Damian received a formal notice from Viktor Sokolov's lawyer stating that due to ongoing financial irregularities, the collateral on his $50 million loan was being called in immediately. Every property Damian had signed over. The Tribeca buildings, the Brooklyn warehouses, the Atlantic City casino holdings, now belonged to the Bratva. Damian read the letter 4 times before his brain accepted what it was saying. Then he called Victor directly. What the hell is this? Victor's voice came through the speaker, sounding almost apologetic. Business, my friend, nothing personal. We had a deal. We had terms, Victor corrected. Terms you violated when your account started bouncing. I gave you capital. You promised returns. Instead, I'm watching you circle the drain while my investors ask uncomfortable questions. He paused. So now I'm taking what's mine before there's nothing left to take. Damian's hand shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. Victor, listen to me. I can fix this. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Victor laughed. Damian, you don't have 2 days. The commission's already talking about replacing you. The other families are carving up your territory like a Thanksgiving turkey. You're finished. I'm not finished. Yes, Victor said gently. You are. The line went dead. Damian stood in his office staring at the phone like it had just told him he was dying. Which, in a way, it had. In their world, once the commission started talking about replacements, you had maybe 48 hours before someone put a bullet in your skull just to keep things tidy. He needed leverage. He needed insurance. He needed something that would make him too valuable to kill. And then he remembered Lorenzo's ledger. The old Don had kept detailed records of every dirty deal, every bribe, every skeleton in every closet across 40 years of criminal enterprise. It was the kind of insurance that kept men alive, because dead men couldn't keep secrets. Damian had searched the penthouse for it after Lorenzo died, but he'd never found it. Because Carmela had taken it, which meant she had the only weapon powerful enough to save him. Damian grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Paulie intercepted him in the hallway. Where are you going? To make a phone call, Damian said. To who? Damian looked at his consigliere with eyes that had gone completely flat. My wife. Carmela's phone buzzed at 10:47 in the morning. Swiss time. Unknown number. Again, she let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello, Damian. His voice came through rough and exhausted. We need to talk. About what? About the ledger, Damian said. I know you have it. I know you took it the night you left, and I need it back. Carmela walked to the window overlooking the lake, watching sailboats drift across water so blue it looked artificial. Why would I give you the one thing keeping you alive right now? Damian went silent for 3 seconds. Then he asked how much she wanted. Carmela laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was light and genuine and completely terrifying. You still think this is about money? Then what's it about? Damian's voice cracked. What do you want from me, Carmela? She watched the sailboats for a long moment. I want you to feel what I felt, she said quietly. Every day for 3 years. The humiliation, the invisibility, the constant knowledge that the person sleeping next to you thinks you're worthless. She paused. I want you to understand what it's like to be erased. I'm sorry. No, you're not, Carmela interrupted. You're scared. There's a difference. Damian's breathing turned ragged. Please, I'm asking you. Whatever I did, whatever I said. You called me camouflage, Carmela said, and for the first time her voice carried actual emotion. Not anger, something colder. You told your mistress I was too fat to be a real wife. You laughed about how pathetic I was. And you did it in a restaurant where anyone could have heard you because you didn't think I mattered enough to be careful. Silence stretched across the transatlantic connection. I was drunk, Damian said finally. I didn't mean it. Yes, you did, Carmela said. That's the problem. You meant every word, and now you get to live with the consequences. She hung up. Damian stared at his phone. and something inside him finally snapped. He threw it across the room so hard it shattered against the marble fireplace. Polly, who'd been listening from the doorway, didn't move. "Feel better?" Polly asked. Damian turned on him with wild eyes. "She's destroying me." "Yeah," Polly said. "She is. So what do I do?" Polly poured them both drinks and handed one to Damian. "You've two options. Option 1, you run. Disappear. Start over somewhere the Commission can't reach you. South America, maybe. Southeast Asia. I'm not running." "Then option 2, Polly continued. "You go to the Commission and tell them everything. Confess that you've lost control of the Costanzo assets. Ask them to intervene." Damian drank his scotch in one burning swallow. "If I do that, they'll kill me for incompetence." "Maybe," Polly admitted, "or maybe they'll see an opportunity. Carmela has the ledger. The ledger has enough dirt to bury half the families in New York. If the Commission can get their hands on it, they'll control the entire eastern seaboard." Damian stared at him. "You want me to offer my wife as bait. I want you to survive," Polly said bluntly. "And right now, she's the only card you've left to play." The Commission meeting happened in a private room at a Brooklyn steakhouse that looked like it hadn't been redecorated since 1973. Wood paneling, red leather booths, oil paintings of horses that nobody actually liked, but everyone pretended to admire. Damian sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 5 men who collectively controlled every major criminal operation from Boston to Baltimore. They watched him with expressions ranging from pity to contempt, and Damian knew, absolutely knew, that he was about 30 seconds away from being voted out of existence. Carlo Messina spoke first. He was 72 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and ran the Messina family with the kind of ruthless efficiency that made younger bosses nervous. "You look like dirt, Damian." "Thank you, Carlo. I'm not complimenting you," Carlo continued. "I'm stating a fact. You've lost 20 pounds. Your suits don't fit. Your hands are shaking. And according to my sources, you just lost all your real estate collateral to the Russians." He leaned back in his chair. "So before we vote on whether to remove you permanently, I'm giving you one chance to explain why you're still worth keeping alive." Damian's throat felt like sandpaper. "My wife has Lorenzo Costanzo's ledger." The room went completely silent. Then Tony Greco, a thin man with silver hair and dead eyes, leaned forward. "Explain." So Damian explained. He told them about Carmela disappearing, about the frozen accounts, about the ledger containing 40 years of blackmail material, strong enough to destroy half the political establishment in New York, about how his wife had transformed from an obedient housewife into something he couldn't recognize. When he finished, the 5 bosses exchanged glances. "Where's she now?" Carlo asked. "Europe. Switzerland, I think, but I don't have confirmation." "Can you get the ledger back?" Damian hesitated. "I can try." "That's not an answer," Tony said coldly. "She hates me," Damian admitted. "She's not going to just hand it over." Marco De Luca, youngest of the 5 bosses, only 43, with a reputation for creative violence, smiled slowly. "Then we don't ask nicely." Carlo shot him a warning look. "We're not kidnapping Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter. That's how you start wars." "Lorenzo's dead," Marco pointed out. "And according to Damian, his daughter's gone rogue. Nobody's protecting her anymore." "She has private security," Damian said. "Former military. I don't know how many, but they're good." "Everyone's good until someone better shows up," Marco said. He turned to Carlo. "We find her, we grab her, we take the ledger. Simple." Carlo studied Damian for a long moment. "If we do this, and I'm not saying we will, but if we do this, you understand what it means, right? We're not rescuing your marriage. We're acquiring an asset. Once we've that ledger, it belongs to the Commission. Not you, not your family. Us." Damian nodded. "I understand. And if she gets hurt in the process?" Something flickered across Damian's face. Something that might have been guilt, or might have been grief, or might have been nothing at all. "Do what you have to do." Carlo nodded slowly. "Then we've a deal." Elias Kane picked up the surveillance intercept at 4:37 in the afternoon, local time. He found Carmela in the library, reading a first-edition copy of something French she'd bought from an antiquarian dealer in Geneva. She looked up when he entered. "What's wrong?" "The Commission just authorized a snatch team," Elias said. "They're coming for you." Carmela closed the book carefully. When? Unknown. "But they've contracted with a group out of Prague. Former special forces. Very good at making people disappear." He paused. We need to move you now. Carmela stood and walked to the window. Below, the lake stretched out calm and perfect, like something from a postcard that didn't have space for violence. No, she said quietly. Elias stared at her. I'm sorry. I said no. Carmela turned to face him. We're not running. Carmela, these men are professionals. So are you, she interrupted. And you told me when I hired you that this estate was defensible. Were you lying? Elias's jaw tightened. No. The security here is top tier. Cameras, motion sensors, armed response team, safe room with independent power and communications. We could hold off an assault for days if necessary. Then we hold, Carmela said simply. Why? Elias demanded. Why risk it? We can have you out of the country in 2 hours. New identity, new location. They'd never find you. Carmela met his eyes. Because running means I lose, and I didn't come this far to lose. Elias studied her, really studied her, looking for fear or doubt or hesitation. He didn't find any. Whatever frightened housewife had existed 4 months ago was completely gone. The woman standing in front of him now looked like someone who'd been carved out of ice and weaponized. You understand they're going to try to kill you, Elias said. Let them try, and if they succeed, Carmela smiled. Then at least Damian doesn't get to watch me disappear quietly. He gets to explain to the underworld why Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter died screaming while he cowered behind the commission's skirts. Elias nodded slowly. Okay then. He pulled out his phone. I'll call the team. We go to full lockdown protocols immediately. One more thing, Carmela said. What? I want cameras everywhere. Body cams on every operative. Live feed to encrypted servers in 3 countries. Her voice stayed perfectly calm. If they come for me, I want the whole world to see it. Elias smiled despite himself. You're not just defending yourself, you're building insurance. I'm building a legacy, Carmela corrected. If I survive this, I want proof of what Damian authorized. And if I don't survive, she trailed off. Well, dead women make excellent martyrs, especially when their murders are caught on camera. The assault team arrived 3 days later. They came at 2:47 in the morning on a moonless night when the lake looked like spilled ink and the mountains were just darker shapes against the darkness. 6 men in tactical gear with suppressed weapons and night vision equipment that turned them into something out of a science fiction nightmare. The estate's perimeter alarms triggered before they'd made it 50 meters past the tree line. Inside the main house, alarms blared. Elias's voice came through Carmela's earpiece, sharp and controlled. We've multiple contacts approaching from the southwest. 6 hostiles. Military formation. This is not a drill. Carmela stood in the safe room watching live feeds from 24 cameras scattered across the property. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands stayed steady. Rules of engagement, she asked. They breach the outer perimeter. We light them up, Elias said. Non-lethal, if possible. But if they return fire, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The assault team hit the first defensive layer at 2:51. Floodlights exploded across the lawn, turning night into day. Automated warning messages blared in 6 languages. You're trespassing on private property. Leave immediately or face armed response. The assault team ignored them and kept moving, so Elias's people opened fire. The first volley came from concealed positions in the tree line. Suppressed rifle fire that shredded the grass around the assault team's feet. Warning shots, professional courtesy, one last chance to walk away. The assault team answered with flashbangs and automatic weapons fire, and suddenly the Swiss countryside erupted into a war zone. Carmela watched it unfold on the screens in front of her. Muzzle flashes strobing through the darkness, men moving in tactical formations, grenades arcing through the air like meteors. It looked choreographed, unreal, like something from a movie that forgot to hire stunt coordinators. But the blood was real. One of the assault team members went down hard with a round through his thigh. Another took shrapnel from a defensive charge that turned 20 square meters of manicured lawn into a crater. The remaining 4 pulled back, regrouped, and tried a different approach. Elias's voice stayed calm through it all, directing his team like a conductor managing an orchestra. Sector 3, shift left. Sector 5, suppressing fire on my mark. The battle lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 hours. By the time the assault team finally retreated, dragging their wounded back toward whatever vehicle they'd hidden in the forest, the estate looked like something that needed apologizing for. Bullet holes pocked the stone walls. Windows were shattered. The garden Carmela had grown to love was churned into mud and shredded vegetation. But the house still stood, and Carmela was still alive. Elias found her in the safe room, still watching the monitors, her face pale but composed. "You okay?" he asked. Carmela nodded. "Did we get it on camera?" Every second, Elias confirmed. Full footage from 6 angles, audio intercepts, identification on 3 of the hostiles. He paused. "This is going to make a hell of a story." Carmela turned to look at him. "Send copies to every major news outlet in the United States. CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, all of them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Once this goes public, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," Carmela said. "I want everyone to know what the commission authorized. I want them to see what happens when powerful men decide a woman doesn't have the right to walk away." Elias nodded and pulled out his phone. "Consider it done." Carmela turned back to the monitors, staring at the wreckage of her temporary sanctuary. She'd spent 3 years being invisible. Now the whole world was about to learn her name. And Damian Valenti was about to discover that some women, when pushed hard enough, don't break. They detonate. The footage hit the internet 48 hours later. Encrypted files delivered anonymously to 24 news organizations with a simple message. Mafia-linked assault team attacks civilian target in Switzerland. Full tactical recordings attached. Within 6 hours, it was everywhere. Cable news ran it on a loop. Internet journalists dissected every frame. Forums exploded with theories. Social media turned Carmela Costanzo into a viral topic. The narrative wrote itself. Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter fleeing an abusive marriage to a mafia underboss, targeted for assassination by a criminal conspiracy that couldn't accept a woman saying no. It was perfect. It was devastating. And it was completely impossible for Damian to deny. Because his face was visible in the background of one photo taken at the commission meeting. Because phone records leaked to journalists showed calls between him and the assault team's coordinator. Because forensic accountants started tracing money and finding trails that led straight back to accounts connected to Damian's remaining associates. The evidence was circumstantial. It was also overwhelming. Carlo Messina called Damian at 11 at night on a Thursday and didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're out." Damian had been expecting this. Didn't make it easier to hear. "Carlo, don't." Carlo interrupted. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't waste my time. You authorized an operation that just put the entire commission in the FBI's crosshairs. Every agent from here to California is now crawling up our backs looking for connections. You're done. It was your idea to grab her, and it was your mess that forced us into that position," Carlo snapped. "You lost control of your wife. You lost control of the Costanzo assets. And now you've lost control of the narrative." He paused. "Clean out whatever you've left and disappear. If you're still in New York 48 hours from now, I can't protect you from what happens next." The line went dead. Damian sat in the dark penthouse, holding a phone that had just pronounced his death sentence. He'd lost everything. The money, the respect, the fear. All of it gone because he'd underestimated a woman he thought was too broken to fight back. And somewhere across the Atlantic, in an estate that looked like a battlefield disguised as luxury real estate, Carmela Costanzo poured herself a glass of wine and watched the sunrise over Lake Zurich like a woman who'd just been reborn. She'd crossed the point of no return. There was no going back to who she used to be. No reconciliation, no forgiveness. Only forward. Only war, and she was going to win. The morning after Carlo Messina's phone call, Damian Valenti packed a single leather duffel bag with whatever still mattered. Cash, passports, a Glock he'd never fired outside a range. He stood in the Tribeca penthouse one last time, trying to figure out when exactly his life had stopped belonging to him. The answer came faster than he wanted. 3 years ago. The moment he looked at Carmela Costanzo across her father's dinner table and saw an opportunity instead of a person. He left the keys on the kitchen counter, walked out without looking back, and by noon he was sitting in a rental car outside a motel in Newark that charged by the hour and smelled like industrial cleaner fighting a losing war against decades of bad decisions. This was rock bottom, or so he thought. Carmela learned about Damian's exile through a news article that landed in her inbox at 6 in the morning, Swiss time. The headline read, "Valenti crime family in disarray as underboss disappears amid federal investigation." She read it twice over coffee while morning light flooded through the bullet-scarred windows of her estate. The article said Damian had vanished, that the commission had officially severed ties, that federal prosecutors were preparing a racketeering case that would probably land half the New York underworld in prison for the next 20 years. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt incomplete, because Damian was still alive, still breathing, still capable of rebuilding somewhere the commission couldn't touch him. And as long as he existed, Carmela would never be truly free. She'd always be the woman defined by her relationship to him, the mob wife who fought back, the daughter who inherited revenge. She wanted more than that. She wanted erasure. Elias found her staring at the lake, lost in thoughts that looked darker than they should have for someone who'd just won a war. "You did it," he said quietly. "He's finished." Carmela didn't turn around. "Is he? The commission exiled him. The feds are building a case. Every family from Boston to Miami knows he's toxic." Elias moved closer. "What more do you want?" Carmela finally looked at him, and her eyes were cold enough to make even Elias pause. "I want him to understand," she said. "I want him to feel what it's like when the person you trusted most in the world turns out to be the knife in your back." Elias studied her carefully. "You're talking about betrayal." "I'm talking about justice," Carmela corrected. "He spent 3 years making me feel worthless. I spent 4 months destroying his empire, but he still doesn't understand why." She paused. "He thinks this about the money, about power. He doesn't realize it was never about any of that." "Then what was it about?" Carmela turned back to the lake. "Being seen," she said quietly. "For once in my life, being seen." Elias nodded slowly. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted into something sharp and focused. "We've a problem." Carmela's pulse quickened. "What kind of problem?" Elias showed her the message. It was a photo taken outside a cafe in Newark. Damian Valenti sitting alone at a corner table, looking like death warmed over and given bad news. And across from him, leaning forward with the body language of someone delivering a proposition, was a man Carmela didn't recognize. Thin, silver-haired, expensive suit. Elias zoomed in on the stranger's face. "That's Marcus Webb, former CIA. Now he runs a private security firm that specializes in extraction operations and witness protection." Elias looked at Carmela. If Damian's talking to him, it means he's planning to disappear for real. New identity, new country, ghost protocol. Carmela felt something cold settle in her chest. "How long do we have?" 48 hours, maybe less. Elias hesitated. "If he gets into Webb's pipeline, we'll never find him. The man's that good." Carmela stared at the photo of her husband, ex-husband, though the paperwork hadn't caught up yet, and felt rage and panic fighting for dominance inside her skull. She'd spent months orchestrating his destruction, and he was about to slip away anyway. "Can you stop it?" she asked. Elias met her eyes. "That depends on how far you're willing to go. The plan came together in 6 hours. Elias had contacts. The kind of people who lived in shadows and solved problems that couldn't be solved legally. He made calls, transferred cryptocurrency, pulled favors from old colleagues who owed him blood debts. By midnight, everything was in place." Carmela sat in the safe room watching live satellite feeds of the Newark motel where Damian had been hiding. The image was grainy, but clear enough to see him pacing his room like a caged animal that had forgotten it used to be the apex predator. "We go tonight," Elias said. "Webb's people are scheduled to pick him up tomorrow morning. If we wait, we lose our window." Carmela nodded. "What's the play? We grab him, bring him here, let you finish this face-to-face." Elias paused. "But you need to understand something. Once we cross this line, there's no walking it back. We're talking about kidnapping, international transport. If this goes sideways, you're not just fighting the commission anymore. You're fighting governments." Carmelo looked at him. "I stopped caring about lines 4 months ago." Elias smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The extraction happened at 3:17 in the morning. Damian was asleep when the door to his motel room exploded inward. He rolled out of bed, reaching for the Glock on the nightstand, but a flashbang grenade detonated before his fingers touched metal. The world turned into white noise and blindness. When his vision cleared, 3 men in tactical gear were standing over him. One of them spoke in accented English, while zip ties secured his wrists behind his back. A black hood went over his head. Then nothing but movement and muffled voices, and the sensation of being cargo. He woke up 12 hours later on a private jet, somewhere over the Atlantic. The estate looked different in daylight. Damian noticed that first. The bullet holes in the stone walls, the churned-up garden. The tactical operator standing guard like this was a military installation instead of a Swiss villa. They walked him through the front door with his hands still zip-tied and the hood finally removed. His eyes adjusted slowly to the interior light. Marble floors, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Zurich. And standing in the center of the room wearing tailored black silk and an expression carved from ice was Carmela. Damian stopped moving. For 5 full seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Carmela nodded at the guards. "Leave us." Elias stepped forward. "Carmela," I said, "leave us." The tactical team exchanged glances but ultimately obeyed. The door closed with a sound like a vault ceiling. Damian and Carmela stood 10 feet apart, staring at each other like strangers meeting for the first time. She looked different. Everything about her looked different. The way she stood, the way she held her head. Even her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a weight he didn't recognize. "Hello, Damian." He swallowed hard, throat dry as sand. "You kidnapped me. You authorized a hit squad to kill me," Carmela replied. "I'd say we're even." Damian looked around the room slowly, calculating distances, exits, possibilities. There were none. He was trapped completely. And the worst part was knowing he'd walked himself into this cage one stupid decision at a time. "What do you want?" he asked. Carmela moved closer, not threatening. Just closing the distance between them like she was tired of shouting across canyons. "I want you to look at me," she said quietly. "Really look at me and tell me what you see." Damian met her eyes. 3 years ago, he'd seen weakness, insecurity, a woman so desperate for validation that she'd accept any scraps of affection he threw her way. Now he saw something that made his hands shake. "I see someone who wants me dead," he said. Carmela smiled. Close, but not quite. She circled him slowly like a prosecutor approaching a witness. "You spent 3 years treating me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, like my only value was what I could give you." She stopped directly in front of him, "So I decided to teach you a lesson." "Congratulations," Damian said bitterly. "You destroyed my life. Lesson learned." "No," Carmela said. "You still don't understand." "Then explain it to me." Carmela looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Your father knew." The words landed like a grenade. Damian went very still. "What?" "Your father," Carmela repeated. "Vittorio Valenti. He knew everything." She walked to a nearby desk and picked up a manila folder. "About Serafina. About you calling me camouflage. About your plans to divorce me the second my father died." Damian's face drained of color. "That's impossible." "He had you under surveillance for 2 years," Carmela continued, opening the folder. "Inside were photographs, transcripts, audio files. He didn't trust you, thought you were reckless, thought you'd destroy the family through sheer arrogance." She looked up. "So he made a deal with my father." The room started tilting. "What kind of deal?" Carmela's voice stayed perfectly calm. "Vittorio agreed to arrange our marriage, to position you as Lorenzo's heir, but only on one condition." She paused. "That if you betrayed me, Lorenzo would destroy you completely. Every asset, every alliance, every protection you thought you had, all of it contingent on you treating me with respect." Damian couldn't breathe. "You're lying, am I?" Carmela pulled out a document. "This is a contract signed by both our fathers 3 months before our wedding. It stipulates that if you ever humiliated me publicly, or if evidence surfaced proving infidelity, Lorenzo's empire would be transferred entirely to me, with explicit instructions to dismantle everything you'd built." She handed him the document. Damian's hand shook so badly he could barely hold the paper, but the signatures were real. The legal language was real. The notary stamps were real. His father had sold him out before the marriage even started. Why? Damian's voice came out broken. Why would he do that? "Because he knew what you were," Carmela said simply. "A man who mistakes cruelty for strength, who thinks power means taking whatever you want without consequences." She took the document back. "He wanted to teach you a lesson. and when you failed to learn it, he made sure I had the tools to finish what he started." Damian sank into the nearest chair, all the fight draining out of him like water through shattered glass. "So this whole time you were being tested." Carmela confirmed, "And you failed, spectacularly." Silence filled the room like smoke. Then Damian looked up at her with eyes that had gone completely hollow. "What happens now?" Carmela walked to the window, staring out at the lake. "That depends on you, on me." "I'm giving you a choice," Carmela said. "Option 1. You sign over everything. Every remaining asset, every shell company, every hidden account you think I don't know about. You cooperate fully with federal investigators. You testify against the commission. And in exchange, I let you walk away with your life." Damian laughed bitterly. "If I testify against the commission, I'm dead within a week." "Then you'd better hope witness protection is as good as advertised," Carmela replied. "Option 2. You refuse, you fight me. And I release every piece of evidence the surveillance footage of you authorizing the hit squad. The financial records proving you've been embezzling from union pension funds. The audio recordings of you discussing deals with federal prosecutors." She turned to face him. "By the time I'm finished, you won't just be exiled. You'll be the most wanted man in organized crime. Every family will have a price on your head, and you'll spend whatever time you've left looking over your shoulder waiting for the bullet." Damian stared at her. "Those are both death sentences." "Yes," Carmela agreed, "but one gives you a chance to survive. The other guarantees you die screaming." She moved closer. "So what's it going to be, Damian? Do you cooperate or do I bury you?" Before Damian could answer, the door burst open. Elias stormed in, looking panicked in a way Carmela had never seen. "We've a problem." Carmela spun toward him. "What?" "The commission just issued a sanction," Elias said. "Not on Damian, on you." The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. "Explain," Carmela said coldly. Elias pulled out his tablet and showed her the encrypted message that had just hit his secure channels. It was from Carlo Messina. It said Lorenzo's daughter has become a liability. The footage of the assault team went public. Federal investigators are now targeting commission operations from Boston to Baltimore. This cannot stand. Authorization granted for permanent resolution. All families notified. Bounty. $10 million. No restrictions on method. Carmelo read it 3 times. Then she looked at Damian. He was staring at her with something that might have been horror or might have been grim satisfaction. "They're going to kill you," he said quietly. "Because of the footage I released," Carmela said, piecing it together. "Because I made them look weak." "Because you embarrassed them," Damian corrected. "In this world, that's worse than murder." He leaned back in his chair. "You thought you were playing chess. But the commission doesn't play games. They erase problems." Carmela turned to Elias. "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe less." Elias's voice was tight. 10 million is enough to bring every mercenary, hitman, and freelancer in Europe to your doorstep. We can't defend this position. Not against that kind of pressure." Carmela felt the walls closing in. She'd spent 4 months destroying Damian, building her empire, positioning herself as untouchable. And in one message, the commission had turned her into prey. "We need to move," Elias said. "Now. New location, new identity. I can have you in Southeast Asia by tomorrow morning." "No," Carmela interrupted. Both men stared at her. "No," Elias repeated. "Carmela, this isn't negotiable. If you stay here, you're dead." Carmela looked at Damian, then at Elias, then out at the lake, where she'd spent 4 months learning how to be someone new. And she made a decision that would change everything. "Cut him loose," she said, nodding at Damian. Elias's eyes widened. "What?" "I said cut him loose." Carmela's voice stayed perfectly calm even though her pulse was hammering. "Remove the zip ties. Give him his phone. Let him go." "Carmela, he'll run straight to the commission." "No, he won't," Carmela said. She looked at Damian. "Because he's going to make a deal with me." Damian stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "What kind of deal?" Carmela moved closer, and her voice dropped into something cold and precise. "You know the commission better than anyone. You know how they think, how they operate, where their vulnerabilities are." She paused. "We team up." The silence stretched for 10 full seconds. Then Damian started laughing. It was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere dark and broken. The laugh of a man who just realized the universe had a sense of humor, and it was targeted directly at him. He stopped laughing. It's either we die separately, or whether we die fighting and take them down with us. Damian looked at Elias. You're okay with this? Elias's expression was unreadable. I'm okay with her staying alive. If that means partnering with you, then yes, I'm okay with it. Damian turned back to Carmela, and after. If we somehow survive this, what happens to me? Carmela met his eyes. You disappear. New identity, new country, and we never see each other again. She paused. But you get to live, which is more than the Commission is offering either of us right now. Damian sat there for a long time, weighing his options. Then he held out his wrists, cut the ties. Elias hesitated. Carmela nodded. The zip ties fell away. Damian rubbed his wrists, staring at the woman who destroyed his life and was now offering him salvation in the same breath. Where do we start? He asked. Carmela walked to the desk and pulled out a map of the northeastern United States covered in pins and annotations. We start, she said quietly, by making the Commission regret they ever underestimated Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Damian Valenti looked at his wife and felt something other than contempt. He felt fear. Because the woman standing in front of him wasn't playing games anymore. She was fighting for her life, and she just turned him into her most dangerous weapon. The war room took shape in 40 minutes. Elias cleared the dining table and spread intelligence reports across the marble surface like they were planning an invasion, which, in a way, they were. Damian stood on one side looking like a man who'd just signed a deal with the devil and was waiting to see if hell had a return policy. Carmela stood on the other side with her arms crossed, watching him with eyes that said she still didn't trust him, but was willing to use him anyway. Smart woman. The Commission has 5 primary enforcement crews, Damian said, pointing at the map. Boston, Newark, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and their main operation in Brooklyn. Each crew runs independently, but reports to Carlo Messina. He's the spider in the center of the web. Elias marked each location with a red pin. How long before they mobilize? They're already moving, Damian replied. Carlo doesn't wait. He makes a decision and executes immediately. He looked at Carmela. You've got maybe 12 hours before the first wave hits this estate, and they won't send another amateur team from Prague. They'll send pros. The kind who don't miss. Carmela's jaw tightened, so we hit them first. Both men looked at her. Hit them, Damian repeated. You understand we're talking about the Commission, right? 5 crime families with centuries of infrastructure. I don't care if they've been operating since the Crusades, Carmela interrupted. They issued a $10 million bounty on my head. That means every enforcer, every associate, every connected lowlife from here to Boston is hunting me right now. She leaned over the map. So we don't wait for them to come. We make them bleed first. Elias studied her carefully. What did you have in mind? Carmela pointed at the Brooklyn pin. Carlo Messina. You said he's the center, so we cut the head off. Dead silence filled the room. Then Damian started laughing again. That same broken sound that made him sound like a man who'd forgotten how sanity worked. You want to assassinate Carlo Messina, he said, in Brooklyn, where he's protected by 36 soldiers and a security system that makes the Pentagon look accessible. I want to make him vulnerable, Carmela corrected. There's a difference. How? Carmela looked at Damian. You're going to call him. The laughter died instantly. Excuse me, you heard me, Carmela said. You're going to call Carlo and tell him you've something he wants. Something valuable enough to bring him out into the open. Damian's face went pale. What could I possibly have that he'd want? Carmela walked to the desk and picked up the black ledger. Lorenzo Costanzo's insurance policy. 40 years of blackmail material that could destroy half the political establishment and most of the criminal underworld along with it. She held it up. Elias inhaled sharply. Carmela, it's the only leverage we have, she said. Carlo wants it. The Commission wants it. Every family wants it. So we use it as bait. Damian stared at the ledger like it was a live grenade. You're serious. Completely. If we give him that ledger, we're not giving him anything, Carmela interrupted. We're making him think we're going to give it to him. And when he shows up to collect, we end this. Elias crossed his arms. Define end this. Carmela met his eyes. However, we have to. The room went quiet again. Then Damian said very carefully, You're talking about killing a commission boss. That's not something you walk away from. Every family from coast to coast will come for you. They're already coming for me, Carmela pointed out. At least this way, I take Carlo with me. Damian looked at Elias. Talk her out of this. But Elias just shrugged. I work for her, not the other way around. He turned to Carmela. If you want to do this, we'll make it happen. But you need to understand the odds. Even with perfect execution, we're talking about a 70% chance this ends with all of us dead. What about the other 30%? Carmela asked. Elias smiled grimly. We become legends. The call happened at 4 in the afternoon Swiss time. Damian sat at the dining table with a burner phone in one hand and his other hand shaking so badly he had to press it flat against the marble to keep it steady. Carmela stood beside him with the ledger open, showing him exactly what pages to reference. Elias monitored the call from his tablet, ready to trace any attempt at a location lock. Damian dialed. Carlo Messina answered on the third ring. You've got a lot of nerve calling me Damian. His voice came through cold and flat. The voice of a man who'd already decided you were dead and was just waiting for the body to catch up with the paperwork. I know, Damian said. His voice came out steadier than Carmela expected. But I've something you want. I doubt that. Lorenzo Costanzo's ledger, Damian said. The real one, not copies. The original. Silence stretched across the transatlantic connection. Then Carlo said, bullshit. Page 47, Damian continued, reading from the notes Carmela had prepared. March 1997. You paid $200,000 to Judge Raymond Kowalski to dismiss racketeering charges against your nephew. The payment went through a shell company called Redstone Holdings. The account number is 4471B9023. More silence. More. Page 82, Damian continued. August 2003. You authorized the execution of Daniel Ricci after he threatened to testify about the New York port scandal. The hit was carried out by Vincent Greco. They buried the body in a construction site in Hoboken that's now a luxury condo building. Carlo's breathing changed. Where did you get that? Lorenzo, Damian said simply. He kept records of everything. Every deal, every murder, every skeleton in every closet from Boston to Miami. He paused. And Carmela has it. Then why are you calling me instead of her? Because she wants to make a deal. Carlo laughed. It sounded like gravel being poured down a metal chute. Your wife put a $10 million target on her own head by releasing that assault footage. Now she wants to negotiate. She wants to survive, Damian corrected. And she knows the only way to do that is to give you something valuable enough to call off the bounty. The ledger, Damian confirmed. Silence again. Then Carlo said where and when. They chose an abandoned warehouse in Red Hook because it was public enough to discourage an immediate execution, but private enough to keep federal eyes away. The meeting was set for midnight, neutral ground, no more than 5 people per side. The exchange would happen in the center of the building under floodlights so nobody could hide in shadows. It was a trap. Both sides knew it was a trap. The question was who would spring theirs first. Carmela spent the afternoon preparing. She changed into tactical clothing. Black pants, reinforced jacket, boots that could handle running or fighting. Elias outfitted her with a concealed vest that would stop most handgun rounds, but felt like wearing a straitjacket made of Kevlar and broken promises. You don't have to be there, Elias said while checking her gear. I can handle the exchange. No, Carmela said. Carlo needs to see me, needs to look me in the eyes and know I'm not afraid of him. Are you? Carmela met his gaze, terrified. But he doesn't need to know that. Elias nodded and handed her a Glock 19. You know how to use this. My father taught me when I was 12, Carmela said. She checked the magazine, chambered around, and tucked it into the holster at her hip. He said women in our world needed to know how to protect themselves because the men around us wouldn't always be there. Smart man. He was, Carmela agreed quietly. Until he wasn't. Trust me. They flew into New York on a private jet at 9 at night. The city looked the same as it always did from the air. A sprawling grid of lights and violence wrapped in concrete and steel. Carmela stared down at it through the window and felt something twist in her chest. She'd grown up here, married here, almost died here. Now she was coming back to finish it. The warehouse sat on the edge of Red Hook, overlooking the water. Rusted metal siding, broken windows. The kind of place where bodies turned up occasionally, And nobody asked too many questions because asking questions in Brooklyn was a good way to become the next body. 3 black SUVs were already parked outside when they arrived. Carlo's people. Elias pulled their vehicle to a stop 50 yards away and killed the engine. He turned to look at Carmela and Damian sitting in the back seat. Last chance to walk away, he said. Neither of them moved. Okay then. Elias checked his weapon. Rules of engagement. If shooting starts, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to fight. You run and you keep running until you're somewhere safe. Understood. Carmela nodded. Damian didn't respond. Elias looked at him. Understood. If shooting starts, we're all dead anyway, Damian said quietly. So it doesn't really matter what the plan is. Cheerful, Elias muttered. Let's go. The warehouse interior was exactly what Carmela expected. Concrete floor, steel beams, industrial floodlights that had been set up specifically for this meeting, casting everything in harsh white light that eliminated shadows and made everyone look like actors in a play nobody wanted to see. Carlo Messina stood in the center with 4 men flanking him. All of them wore expensive suits that didn't quite hide the bulges of shoulder holsters. Carlo himself looked exactly like his photographs. 72 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with eyes that had watched people die and forgotten their names by morning. He smiled when he saw Carmela. Lorenzo's daughter, he said. You look different than I remember. I grew up, Carmela replied. You grew dangerous, Carlo corrected. There's a difference. Carmela walked forward until she was 10 feet away from him, close enough to see the lines carved into his face by decades of violence, close enough to smell his cologne mixing with cigar smoke and old leather. You issued a bounty on me, she said. You embarrassed the commission, Carlo replied. What did you expect? A thank you card. I expected men who pride themselves on power to understand what happens when they underestimate women. Carlo's smile widened. Is that what this is? A feminist statement. This is survival, Carmela said. You want the ledger. I want the bounty canceled. We make the trade and everyone walks away. Show me. Carmela nodded at Elias. He stepped forward and placed the black ledger on an overturned crate between them. The leather looked old and worn under the floodlights. 40 years of secrets bound in cowhide and thread. Carlo gestured at one of his men. The enforcer, a thin guy with dead eyes and a face that looked like it had been broken multiple times, moved forward and opened the ledger. He spent 3 minutes flipping through pages, cross-referencing dates and names against something on his phone. Then he looked at Carlo and nodded. It's real. Carlo's expression didn't change. How do I know this is the only copy? You don't, Carmela said. But Lorenzo was old school. He didn't trust digital records. This is the original, the only one. You expect me to believe that. I expect you to recognize that if I had copies, I would have already released them, Carmela pointed out. I released the assault footage because I wanted to hurt you. If I had more ammunition, I would have used it. Carlo studied her for a long moment. Then he said, You've got guts, kid, I'll give you that. He gestured at his men. Take the ledger. The thin enforcer reached for it. That's when everything went wrong. Damian moved. He grabbed the Glock from Carmela's holster before anyone could stop him, raised it toward Carlo, and pulled the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. 2 of Carlo's men went down immediately. The third took a round in the shoulder and spun sideways. Carlo himself dove behind the crate, surprisingly fast for a man his age. Elias was already moving, dragging Carmela backward while return fire erupted from Carlo's remaining enforcer. What the hell are you doing? Carmela screamed at Damian. But Damian wasn't listening. His face had gone blank and terrible. The face of a man who'd crossed a line and discovered he didn't care about the consequences. Finishing this, he said. Then he advanced on Carlo's position. More gunfire, more chaos. Carmela couldn't tell who was shooting at who anymore. Everything was muzzle flashes and the smell of cordite and people screaming orders that nobody could hear. Elias shoved Carmela toward the exit. Move. She stumbled forward, tripped over debris, caught herself, kept running. Behind her, the warehouse erupted into a full-scale firefight. Bullets shredded metal. Ricochets whined through the air. Someone was screaming, but she couldn't tell if it was pain or rage. They burst through a side door into the freezing November night. Elias pulled her toward their vehicle while his radio crackled with voices reporting contacts, casualties, exfil routes. Where's Damian? Carmela gasped. Forget him. Where is he? Elias looked back at the warehouse. Through the broken windows, they could see silhouettes moving through smoke and darkness. More gunfire. Then silence. Horrible silence. We need to leave, Elias said. Now. But Carmela couldn't move. She stood there staring at the warehouse while her ex-husband disappeared into violence he'd started and probably wouldn't survive. Then the front entrance exploded outward. Damian stumbled through the opening covered in blood that might have been his, or might have been someone else's. He was still holding the Glock, still moving forward like a machine that hadn't received the message that it was broken. Carlo's remaining enforcer appeared behind him. Raised his weapon. Carmela didn't think. She grabbed Elias's sidearm from his holster, raised it with both hands the way her father taught her, and fired. The round caught the enforcer's center mass. He went down hard. Damian turned, saw her standing there with the smoking gun, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just recognition. Two people who destroyed each other, discovering they could still save each other anyway. Get in the car, Elias barked. This time, Carmela obeyed. Damian reached the vehicle 3 seconds later. They peeled out while sirens began wailing in the distance, and Red Hook transformed into a crime scene that would dominate headlines for weeks. They made it to a safe house in New Jersey before Carmela allowed herself to process what had just happened. Damian sat on a ratty couch in the basement, pressing a towel against a graze wound on his ribs. Elias was on 3 different phones coordinating extraction plans and damage control. And Carmela stood against the far wall staring at her hands like she'd never seen them before. She just killed someone. Actually killed them. The knowledge sat in her chest like broken glass. Elias finally hung up his phones and turned to Damian with murder in his eyes. What the hell was that? Damian looked up at him through sweat and exhaustion. Ending it. You were supposed to make the trade. There was never going to be a trade, Damian interrupted. You think Carlo was going to let any of us walk out of there alive? He was stalling, waiting for his backup to surround the building. He laughed bitterly. I just did what all of you were too naive to admit needed doing. Elias stepped forward. You endangered Carmela. I saved her, Damian snapped. Carlo's dead. I put 3 rounds in him before his men dragged him out. Even if he survives the night, he's finished. And without Carlo, the commission falls apart. He looked at Carmela. You wanted him destroyed. Congratulations. Mission accomplished. Carmela finally found her voice. You almost got us killed. We were already dying, Damian said. I just accelerated the timeline. And now every family from Boston to Miami will be hunting us. They were already hunting us, Damian interrupted. Now they're just doing it without leadership. He stood, wincing at the pain in his ribs. You wanted a war, Carmela. You wanted revenge. Well, here it is. This is what winning looks like. Blood and chaos, and nobody walking away clean. Carmela stared at him and realized he was right. She'd spent 4 months orchestrating his destruction, dismantling his empire, teaching him what humiliation felt like. And somewhere along the way, she'd crossed a line she'd never intended to cross. She'd become exactly what she'd sworn she wouldn't become. Someone capable of violence. Someone who could look another human being in the eyes and pull the trigger. What happens now? She asked quietly. Elias answered. Now we run. Carlo's people will regroup within hours. The commission will either collapse into a power vacuum or rally behind whoever's strong enough to take control. Either way, you're both targets until this settles. How long? Damian asked. Weeks, months, maybe never. Elias looked at Carmela. This is the rest of your life now. Looking over your shoulder, changing identities, never staying in one place long enough to feel safe. Carmela walked to the window and stared out at suburban New Jersey stretching into darkness. She'd wanted justice. She'd gotten war. There's one more thing, Elias said quietly. Both Carmela and Damian turned to look at him. The ledger, Elias continued. In all the chaos, nobody secured it. Carmela's blood went cold. What? Carlo's people grabbed it during the firefight, Elias said. Which means whoever takes over the commission now has 40 years of blackmail material and leverage. Damian closed his eyes. We're screwed. Not yet, Elias said. He pulled out his tablet. I've got something that might help. He showed them a video file. The timestamp read 11:53 at night. The location tag read Red Hook Warehouse, and the footage showed everything. Damian shooting first, Carlo's men returning fire, the chaos, the violence. All of it captured in high-definition clarity from 3 different angles. "You recorded it," Carmela said. "I record everything," Elias replied. "It's how I stay alive." He looked at her. "I want you to survive," Elias corrected. "And the only way you survive this is if the commission has bigger problems than hunting you." He gestured at the tablet. "This footage is evidence, real evidence. The kind that starts racketeering cases and ends with bosses dying in federal prison. If we give this to the FBI, we're marked forever," Damian said. "We'll never be able to come back. Never be able to show our faces anywhere the families operate." "You're already marked," Elias pointed out. "This just gives you protection while you disappear." Carmela looked at Damian. For the first time in 4 months, they were on the same side. Both of them hunted. Both of them desperate. Both of them staring at a choice that would define whatever time they had left. "What do you think?" she asked him. Damian met her eyes and said something she never expected. "I think your father would be proud of you." Carmela's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you did exactly what he always wanted," Damian said quietly. "You fought back. You refused to be erased. And you turned the entire criminal underworld upside down because they thought kindness meant weakness." He paused. "He was right about you. I was wrong." Silence filled the basement. Then Carmela turned to Elias. "Make the call." Elias nodded and pulled out his phone. And just like that, Carmela Costanzo and Damian Valenti became federal witnesses. The war wasn't over, but they just changed sides. The FBI safe house smelled like instant coffee and institutional disinfectant. Carmela sat at a metal table in a windowless room somewhere in Northern Virginia, while 2 federal prosecutors reviewed the footage Elias had handed over. They'd been watching for 40 minutes. Neither of them had said a word. They just kept rewinding, pausing, taking notes, exchanging glances that Carmela couldn't read. Damian sat across from her, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 12 hours. The grays wound on his ribs had been cleaned and bandaged by a federal medic who didn't ask questions and didn't make eye contact. His expensive suit was ruined, blood-stained, torn, a costume from a life that no longer existed. Finally, the lead prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen with sharp eyes and sharper questions, closed her laptop and looked at them. "This is enough," she said. Carmela's pulse quickened. Enough for what? "Enough to bring racketeering charges against what's left of the commission," Chen replied. "Enough to flip 3 mid-level captains who'll testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Enough to dismantle organized crime infrastructure that has operated in the city for 70 years. She paused. "But only if you're willing to cooperate fully." "Define fully," Damian said. "Everything," Chen said bluntly. "Every name, every location, every deal you witnessed or participated in. You testify in open court. You submit to depositions. You help us build cases against everyone from street-level enforcers to the bosses still breathing." She leaned forward. "And in exchange, we put you in witness protection. New identities, new lives. The kind of disappearing act that ensures you survive long enough to die of old age instead of a bullet." Carmela looked at Damian. He looked back at her. And something passed between them that hadn't existed before. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but understanding. They destroyed each other, rebuilt themselves, and now they were being offered a chance to vanish into ordinary lives where nobody knew their names or cared about their past. "What happens to us?" Carmela asked quietly. Chen understood the question immediately. "You mean together?" Carmela nodded. "That's your choice," Chen said. "Witness protection can place you separately or together. Different cities, different states, whatever arrangement keeps you safest and sane." She glanced between them. "Though I'll be honest, most couples don't survive this process. The stress, the isolation, the constant fear, it breaks people." "We're already broken," Damian said. Chen smiled without humor. "Then maybe you've got a chance." The debriefing lasted 6 days. They sat in separate rooms answering identical questions from different prosecutors, FBI agents, organized crime specialists. Every detail from the past 4 months was dissected, analyzed, cross-referenced. Bank records, shell corporations, offshore accounts, the assault in Switzerland, the meeting in Red Hook. Carlo Messina's condition was critical but stable, which meant he'd survived long enough to face federal charges. On the seventh day, Chen brought them news that changed everything. "Carlo's talking," she said. Carmela looked up from the coffee she'd been nursing for the past hour. "Carlo Messina. He's cooperating." Chen sat down across from them with a folder thick enough to be a weapon. 3 days ago, he was still refusing to say anything. Then yesterday, he found out the other commission bosses voted to cut him loose, decided he was too much of a liability, too much federal attention. She opened the folder, so he flipped, started naming names, and one of those names was yours. Damian went very still. "Mine. Both of you, actually," Chen said. She pulled out a transcript. According to Carlo, the assault team in Switzerland wasn't authorized by the commission. It was a rogue operation funded by someone else entirely. Carmela's stomach dropped. "Who?" Chen looked at Damian. "Your father." The room temperature plummeted 20 degrees. Damian stared at her like she'd just spoken a language he didn't recognize. "That's impossible. My father's been dead for 2 years. Your half-brother," Chen corrected. "Marcus Valenti. Apparently, your father had a second family in Philadelphia that nobody in New York knew about. Marcus is 38. Former military, smart, ambitious." She slid a photograph across the table. "And according to Carlo, he's been orchestrating a power play to take over both the Valenti and Costanzo territories by eliminating everyone in his way." Carmela picked up the photograph. The man staring back at her had Damian's jawline, their father's eyes, and an expression that suggested he'd learned violence young and never forgotten how to use it. "Why would he target me?" Carmela asked. "Because you've what he wants," Chen said. "The Costanzo fortune, the offshore accounts, the political leverage. As long as you're alive, you're an obstacle." She looked at Damian. "And your collateral damage. A loose end from the old regime." Damian laughed bitterly. "So my father's bastard son tried to kill both of us so he could inherit an empire that's already collapsed." "Not collapsed," Chen corrected. "Restructuring. Marcus has been quietly consolidating power while the commission fell apart. He's got crews in 3 cities. Protection from federal prosecution through contacts your father built before he died. And he's still looking for you." Carmela set the photograph down carefully. "Where's he now?" "That's the problem," Chen said. "We don't know. He's gone dark. No electronic signature. No movement on any accounts we're monitoring. It's like he vanished." Elias, who'd been standing silently in the corner, finally spoke. "He's waiting." Everyone turned to look at him. "Waiting for what?" Chen asked. "For them to surface," Elias said, nodding at Carmela and Damian. "He knows they're in protective custody, knows they're cooperating. So he's being patient, waiting for the moment they think they're safe. Then he'll move." Chen's expression hardened. "We can protect them." "No, you can't," Elias interrupted. "Not from someone like Marcus. Former military means he knows how witness protection works, knows the protocols, the safe houses, the security procedures." He looked at Carmela. "If he wants you dead, he'll find a way." Silence settled over the room like ash. Then Carmela said, "So we find him first." Chen shook her head immediately. "Absolutely not. You're witnesses, not operatives." "I'm a target," Carmela interrupted, "and I'm tired of running from men who think I'm too weak to fight back." She stood. "You said Marcus wants what I have, the accounts, the leverage. So let's give him what he wants." "You want to use yourself as bait," Elias said. "I want to end this," Carmela corrected. "For real this time. No more safe houses. No more waiting for the next assassination attempt. We draw him out, we finish it, and then we disappear." Damian was staring at her with something that might have been respect or might have been horror. "You're serious. Completely." Chen looked at both of them for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll need to clear this with my superiors." "Clear it," Carmela said. "Because I'm doing this whether you help me or not." The trap took 3 days to set. They leaked information through carefully selected channels. Rumors that Carmela Costanzo was transferring her father's offshore accounts through a private bank in Manhattan, that she'd be present for the final authorization, that security would be minimal to avoid drawing attention. It was a lie wrapped in enough truth to be believable. The meeting location was a building in the financial district, 12 stories, underground parking, multiple exits. The kind of place where rich people moved money quietly and nobody asked uncomfortable questions. The FBI filled it with undercover agents disguised as bankers, security guards, maintenance workers, snipers positioned on adjacent rooftops, SWAT teams in unmarked vans 3 blocks away. Enough firepower to invade a small country. Carmela wore a wire beneath a tailored gray suit that made her look like someone who belonged in boardrooms and shareholder meetings. Damian stood beside her wearing similar armor, though his eyes kept scanning the room like he expected bullets to start flying any second. Elias coordinated everything from a surveillance van 2 streets over, watching feeds from 24 cameras while federal agents listened to encrypted radio chatter. The meeting was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. At 2:47, Marcus Valenti walked through the front door. He looked exactly like his photograph. Tall, confident, moving through the lobby like a man who'd never questioned his right to occupy space. 2 men flanked him. Private security or hired muscle. Hard to tell the difference. Elias's voice came through Carmela's earpiece. Target confirmed. West entrance. 2 associates. Stay calm. Carmela's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hand stayed steady. Marcus approached the reception desk, gave his name, was directed toward the elevators. The doors closed behind him with a soft mechanical whisper. "He's coming up," Elias said. "Conference room C, 3rd floor. All teams in position." Carmela and Damian waited in the conference room, surrounded by glass walls and leather furniture that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Through the windows, Manhattan stretched out in every direction. Millions of people living ordinary lives, while 3 floors below them, federal agents prepared to end a war that had been burning for months. The elevator chimed. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Marcus Valenti stepped into the conference room and smiled at them like they were old friends reuniting after too long apart. "Carmela," he said warmly. "Damian, it's good to finally meet you properly." Neither of them responded. Marcus's smile widened. "Come on, don't be rude. We're family. We're nothing," Damian said coldly. "We're blood," Marcus corrected. He moved further into the room, his 2 associates staying near the door. "Our father built something incredible, an empire that could have lasted generations. But he made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, married the wrong families." He looked at Carmela. "No offense. None taken," Carmela said, "since I'm about to watch federal agents arrest you." Marcus laughed. "You think I walked in here without knowing this was a trap?" He gestured around the room. 4 undercover agents in this building. 2 snipers on adjacent rooftops. SWAT teams waiting 3 blocks away. He pulled out his phone and showed them a live feed of the FBI surveillance van. "I know everything, Carmela, because unlike my brother, I'm not arrogant enough to underestimate my enemies." Damian stepped forward. "Then why are you here?" "Because I wanted to see you," Marcus said simply. "Both of you. I wanted to look you in the eyes and explain why this has to end the way it's going to end." "Which is?" Carmela asked. Marcus's expression hardened. "With me taking what's mine. The Costanzo fortune. The Valenti territories. All of it." He looked at Damian. "Our father spent his whole life building this empire, and then he gave it to you. His legitimate son. The one who squandered everything through incompetence and ego." Marcus's voice turned sharp. "I spent 20 years in the shadows, fighting, bleeding, earning respect. And I got nothing, because I was born on the wrong side of the marriage certificate." "So this about jealousy," Damian said. "This about justice," Marcus snapped. "I'm taking what should have been mine from the beginning, and you're going to help me." Carmela felt the wire beneath her suit jacket, recording every word. "How?" Marcus pulled out a tablet. "You're going to transfer every offshore account Lorenzo set up into holdings I control. You're going to authorize it. Right here, right now. And if I refuse..." Marcus gestured at his associates. Both men pulled out concealed firearms. Federal agents hidden throughout the building immediately responded. Weapons drawn, shouting. The conference room erupted into chaos as tactical teams flooded the floor and civilians dove for cover. But Marcus didn't flinch. He just looked at Carmela and said, "Then everyone in this building dies, including you." Carmela met his eyes and realized he meant it. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a suicide mission. Marcus had come here knowing he wouldn't leave alive. He'd come to force her hand to take everything from her, even if it cost him his life. "You're insane," Damian said. "I'm desperate," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." Carmela looked around the room. Federal agents had Marcus and his men surrounded. Weapons trained, orders being shouted, but nobody was firing because one wrong move would trigger a bloodbath. She looked at the tablet Marcus was holding. Then she looked at Elias's surveillance feed, visible through the glass walls, and she made a choice. "Give me the tablet," she said quietly. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "What?" "I said, give me the tablet." Carmela stepped forward. "You want the accounts? Fine, take them. I'm done fighting over money that's soaked in blood anyway." "Carmela," Damian started. She cut him off with a look. "It's just money, Damian. It's not worth dying for." Marcus stared at her like he was trying to figure out if this was another trap. Then he handed her the tablet. Carmela pulled up the offshore banking interface, entered her biometric authorization, watched as decades of criminal fortune waited for her final approval. And then she transferred everything, not to Marcus's accounts, to federal holding accounts managed by the Treasury Department. Every dollar, every shell corporation, every hidden asset Lorenzo Costanzo had accumulated over 40 years, all of it gone. Marcus realized what she'd done 3 seconds too late. "No. It's over," Carmela said. She handed the tablet back to him. "The money's gone. The empire's gone. There's nothing left to fight for." Marcus stared at the screen, showing empty accounts and frozen holdings. Then he started laughing. It was the same broken sound Damian had made weeks earlier. The laugh of a man watching his entire world collapse and realizing he had nothing left to lose. "You destroyed it," Marcus said. "You destroyed everything." "I freed us," Carmela corrected. "All of us." Marcus raised his weapon. Federal agents screamed warnings, and Carmela stood perfectly still, staring at her husband's half-brother with eyes that had stopped being afraid months ago. "Go ahead," she said quietly. "Pull the trigger. Prove you're exactly what our fathers made you. Another violent man who thinks power comes from taking instead of building." Marcus's hand shook. The room held its breath. Then Damian stepped between them. "She's right," he said. His voice was steady, calm. "It's over, Marcus. The money's gone. The commission's destroyed. The only thing left is whether you die today or spend the rest of your life in federal prison." He paused. "Choose." Marcus looked at his half-brother, then at Carmela, then at the federal agents surrounding them with enough firepower to end this in seconds. And slowly, so slowly, he lowered his weapon. "I choose neither," he said. Then he turned the gun on himself. Carmela screamed. Damian lunged forward, but they were both too late. The gunshot echoed through the conference room like thunder, and Marcus Valenti collapsed onto expensive carpeting that would never be clean again. The aftermath took weeks. Carlo Messina pleaded guilty to racketeering charges and received 25 years in federal prison. 3 other commission bosses followed. The remaining families fractured into smaller operations that spent more time fighting each other than rebuilding. The Costanzo fortune, all of it, was seized by federal authorities and used to fund victim compensation programs for families destroyed by organized crime. Carmela Costanzo and Damian Valenti disappeared into witness protection. They were given new names, new social security numbers, new lives in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest where nobody recognized them and nobody cared about their past. The government offered to place them separately. They chose to stay together, not because they loved each other, not because they'd forgiven the things they'd done, but because they were the only 2 people in the world who understood what it cost to survive the war they'd started. 6 months later, Carmela stood in a small bakery she'd opened using money from the federal witness stipend. The shop was modest. 12 tables, a display case filled with pastries she made every morning before sunrise. The kind of place where regulars knew her name, her new name, and asked about her weekend. She wore jeans and a flour-dusted apron. Her hair was longer now, softer. She'd gained back some of the weight she'd lost during those months in Switzerland, when survival was the only thing that mattered. She looked different. She felt different. The bell above the door chimed. Damian walked in carrying groceries from the market 3 blocks away. He'd started working construction, manual labor that left his hands calloused and his back sore, but gave him something to do besides think about everything he'd lost. "How was the morning rush?" he asked. "Good," Carmela replied. Mrs. Chen bought 3 loaves of sourdough, said it reminds her of bakeries in Shanghai. Damian nodded and set the groceries on the counter. They moved around each other carefully, politely, like roommates who shared space but not intimacy. They slept in separate bedrooms, ate meals together in comfortable silence, went to therapy separately, and sometimes together when the nightmares got too bad. It wasn't a marriage, it was survival. And some days that was enough. "I'm thinking about taking a trip," Carmela said while wiping down tables. Damian looked up. "Where?" "I don't know, somewhere quiet, maybe the coast." She paused. "You could come if you want." Damian studied her for a long moment. "Do you want me to?" Carmela met his eyes, and for the first time in 6 months she told him the truth. "I don't know," she said. "Some days I look at you and I still see the man who called me camouflage, who laughed about how pathetic I was, who married me for an empire instead of love." She set down the cloth. "But other days I look at you and I see the man who stepped between me and a bullet, who chose to burn everything down rather than let them take me, who's trying to build something better even though we both know we're probably going to fail." Damian's jaw tightened. "I was a monster to you." "You were," Carmela agreed, "and I became a monster right back. We destroyed each other, Damian. Completely. There's no pretending otherwise, so why stay?" Carmela walked closer, because leaving would mean they won. "The commission. Your father. Every man who ever looked at me and saw something disposable." She paused. "I spent 3 years being invisible. I'm not doing that again. Not for you, not for anyone." Damian nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" "We survive," Carmela said simply. "We wake up every morning and we bake bread and we build furniture and we pretend we're people who deserve ordinary lives. And maybe someday we'll actually believe it. And if we don't—" Carmela smiled sadly. "Then at least we tried." The bell above the door chimed again. A customer walked in asking about cinnamon rolls. Carmela turned away from Damian and smiled at the stranger with the kind of practiced warmth that came from years of hiding pain beneath politeness. "Fresh out of the oven," she said. "How many would you like?" And just like that, the moment passed. Life continued. Not the life she'd imagined when she was Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter living in a Tribeca penthouse. Not the life she'd dreamed about when she married a handsome underboss and believed fairy tales still existed. But a life nonetheless. Smaller, quieter, built on foundations of flour and sawdust instead of blood and empire. And on the days when the nightmares came. When she woke up gasping, seeing Marcus's body on expensive carpet or hearing gunfire echo through Swiss estates, Damian was there. Not to fix her, not to save her, but to sit beside her in the darkness and remind her that survival wasn't always beautiful. Sometimes it was just breathing, and that was enough. 2 years after everything ended, Carmela received a letter. It arrived at the bakery with no return address, just her new name written in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, half expecting threats or bounties or ghosts from a past that refused to stay buried. Instead, she found a single photograph. Lorenzo Costanzo standing beside a younger version of herself. She couldn't have been more than 16. They were at some family gathering she barely remembered, and her father was looking at her with an expression she'd forgotten he was capable of making. Pride. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Your father knew what you'd become. He always knew. Be well." No signature, no explanation. Just that. Carmela stared at the photograph for a long time. Then she tucked it into her apron pocket and went back to kneading dough, because that's what survival looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic revelations, just the simple act of continuing. Of making bread, even when your hands still remembered how to pull triggers. Of building something ordinary from the ruins of something terrible. Of learning that justice wasn't always about revenge. Sometimes it was just about waking up the next morning and choosing once again to exist. Carmela Costanzo, the woman who'd been called camouflage, who'd destroyed an empire out of humiliation and rage, who'd crossed every line and burned every bridge, was gone. The woman who remained was someone new. Someone quieter. Someone who understood that the people ignored long enough don't always learn where to place the knife. Sometimes they learn to put the knife down entirely. And that, in the end, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because a woman who chooses peace after surviving war isn't weak. She's terrifying. She's proof that strength doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like flour-dusted aprons and cinnamon rolls cooling on wire racks, and the choice to keep breathing even when everything inside you wants to stop. Carmela made that choice every single day, and some days it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but she did it anyway. Because Lorenzo Costanzo's daughter had finally learned the truth her father tried to teach her all along. The real empire wasn't money or power or revenge, it's survival, and she had won.